Starting with games like Crusader Quest and Mobius Final Fantasy, I've often dabbled in a gacha game or two since their introduction to the gaming world. But 2018 was the year that changed everything for me. It was then that gacha games almost completely altered my life, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. With the release of Epic 7 and Dragalia Lost, my genuine and unfortunate love for the gacha gameplay loop began. I craved what they had to offer, and I played them almost exclusively, which made Genshin's impact on the scene all the more disruptive when I saw just how grand and immersive these gacha games could be when they became a little bit closer to the traditional console games that I grew up on. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that felt this way. The first big budget attempt at an open world gacha was a massive success, and while it was initially a breath of fresh air, I do believe it's time for us to move away from that format, and now's as good a time as any to start. I'm Forte, and let's talk about how it's time to phase out the identical open world design plaguing modern gacha games. So what is the gameplay loop? At their core, all gacha gameplay revolves around one thing: currency. Leveling materials, stamina, gacha pools, all of these work as currency to be spent on something else, with the end result being that rush of dopamine you get once you get a new character or weapon from the gacha system. Once you have your shiny new toy, you start the process all over again. And this holds true across all gacha games. I mean, of course, that's because gacha devs also revolve around currency and their ability to get players to spend real life dollars, so the similarities will begin to surface among these games without fail. It's inevitable. To paraphrase Ryan, lead developer for the team behind Arknights Enfield, who said that in a lot of these open world gacha titles, players go in for 1 hour and they already know what to expect for the next 20. Fortunately, not all gacha games are doomed to the fate of being a carbon copy of the game that came before it. Far from it, actually. While the most loved and successful games in gacha history share the same ultimate goal, the key difference lies in how that journey to the goal is packaged. I believe the most variety we had in the gacha space was during the earlier years, while developers were still trying to figure out their direction they wanted to take their games and what format kind of worked the best for pushing players to spend more. It was during this time that we had more puzzle gachas, rhythm gachas, beat 'em ups, and more. While these types of gachas still exist nowadays, the diversity in genres was a little bit more prevalent back then. Around 2015, the industry started to lean more into the turn-based gameplay similar to games like the old Final Fantasies and the Dragon Quests, and it was much harder to find a game that didn't follow suit. Luckily, turn-based gameplay, while rigid in strict definition, still allowed for a lot of creativity and application. This is where the more gifted devs flourished. Although the industry has started to follow a similar pattern for their games, those who were able to put a unique spin on the formula were able to stand above the crowd, like Fate Grand Order, Fire Emblem Heroes, and Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. In a similar fashion, devs would stand out when they decided to buck the turn-based trend altogether, like Genshin Impact or Azure Lane. It was around this time that I found Dragalia Lost, RIP to the GOAT, and Epic 7. Dragalia was a standout for its time due to two reasons. One, it was a well-made top-down action RPG gacha with an emphasis on co-op. And two, its production value was noticeably higher than a lot of its competition. This was mostly because the game had Nintendo money behind it, and the developers of the game was Cygames, the company responsible for Grand Blue Fantasy. With both of these entities behind it, the high quality was pretty much expected. For Epic 7, it drew heavily from Summoner's War, another turn-based gacha from 2014 that was extremely successful. And while it didn't reinvent the wheel for turn-based gameplay, it did repackage it with a high-quality anime aesthetic that's still considered to be one of the best looking in 2D gachas to this day. Play the anime. A tagline short, sweet, and sold exactly what Epic 7 had to offer. I was absolutely hooked on both of these games for literal years, and without a doubt they formed many of the gaming habits that I have now, and I would only occasionally break away from them to test out different gachas. However, I would always return to my two favorites in the end. But it was during one of these breaks that something monumental happened, shifting gacha gaming forever, although I had no idea at the time. The slow rise in popularity that gacha games had seen, mixed with the sudden chaos caused by the big vid virus of 2020, built on top of the lingering effect that Breath of the Wild had had on gaming as a whole, created a perfect storm for one game to turn the industry on its head. And it's fair to say that the gacha space as we know it today was made completely possible by the success of Genshin Impact. Kudos to Hoyo. No matter how you feel about Genshin, its influence is undeniable. It was the first AAA attempt at pushing what a gacha could be and succeeded in spades. A new influx of money pumping into the scene, new eyes on gacha gaming as a whole. For better or for worse, Genshin's become the new face of the current gacha wave, establishing a template for all games going forward. Breath of the Wild-like exploration paired with a party-based elemental reaction combat system, material gathering to level up characters with certain materials being stamina or time gated, and mostly timer-based endgame modes and collectathon time wasters to earn currency for pulling in the gacha system. It's important to understand that despite Genshin introducing a new open world formula to follow, the typical turn-based structure will always have a place in gacha gaming since funding becomes a much bigger issue for anyone looking to follow Genshin's lead. Time and money are a bigger hurdle when designing a large world to explore, so many companies are still incentivized to work within their means, opting for smaller and cheaper gameplay systems while putting a unique touch on it. That said, for the more ambitious companies with the funding to back it up, the blueprints were already set. The industry started the race to dethrone Genshin, and amongst the games that were able to stick around, it's obvious what laid their foundations. Wuthering Waves, a game that's close to my own heart that used to wear its inspirations on its sleeve. On launch, it was frequently compared to Genshin Impact, and the developers Kuro Games did not help when it came to easing those comparisons. WoWa was originally marketed as a more post-apocalyptic setting with a darker tone. However, there was a shift in direction during development that landed the game closer to Genshin's tone and look than people were expecting. With its new direction, WoWa solidly sat in a familiar fantasy open world setting with combat that has its own nuances that differentiate it from Genshin's, but still uses a party system that would make it indistinguishable on first glance. Even the original UI felt like such a one-to-one copy to Genshin's that many thought it was hard to immediately tell the difference between the two games. 2 years later, Wuthering Waves is holding strong as a competitor and has found its own identity, moving away from the clone accusations that it used to receive, and even surpassing Genshin in some aspects such as gameplay and presentation. But ultimately, as a much bigger WoWa fan, I can say that the game didn't stray too far from its Genshin DNA. Next, a much bigger departure from its foundations, Arknights Enfield. On the surface, Enfield does look like a game that has much more of a different vibe than Genshin or WoWa. It's steeped in a kind of sci-fi first aesthetic, and the inclusion of the factory building system really shakes up the formula in a big way. Where similar games want you to explore and gather most material you need to power up characters and weapons, Enfield says the factory must grow and asks that you automate a lot of the material grind. As far as combat goes, Enfield utilizes a reaction style combat system of its own that isn't strictly limited to elemental reactions, and unlike most games similar to it, your party is always on field with you. A small touch, but a welcome addition nonetheless. However, despite the big swings that it does take to make itself stand out, the open world format does demand a certain gameplay flow because at the end of the day, these are gacha games. The open world still involves a collectathon with time and stamina gated materials that can't be acquired through the factory system, and the combat centers around a full team-based party system that incentivizes continued gacha pools. A more unique presentation with Genshin still at its core. Lastly, a game that's strikingly distinct from the competition, and despite me having the least amount of time on it, it's a game that I really wanted to like. Neverness to Everness. When it comes to how the open world approach is packaged, NTE stands out wonderfully. It benefits greatly from being the first urban fantasy open world gacha, and its setting is genuinely a fresh take. A bright, colorful cityscape laced with SCP-like entities, a variety of activities and minigames to experience, and additionally, NTE has a much more friendly implementation of its gacha system when compared to other games. On paper, this game has a lot going for it that its competition lacks. Unfortunately, once you look past the presentation, you find a game that's just as close to Genshin as WoWa, if not a bit closer. All the usual suspects are here. The gated grinding, a giant map littered with things to collect, and from what I could gather, timer-based in-game modes that eventually push you to pull on banners. I really love the opening moments of NTE, and again, I really wanted to like this game. But by this point, I had reached a certain level of open world fatigue with these gacha games. Which brings me to my biggest issue. These games take up a lot of time without offering much to switch things up. In a vacuum, there isn't anything inherently wrong with the gated resources, the timer-based in-game modes, the party-based combat, or the material gathering character progression system. But the end result of all these systems together dropped into a large open world creates a much more involved and time-consuming mesh of a gameplay loop when compared to their predecessors. And when every big budget gacha is essentially trying to do the same thing without a radically different way to mix things up, not only does it get stale, it starts to highlight just how much of a time sink this particular formula is. With people already committing so much time to their preferred open world gacha, developers attempting similar kinds of games are going to have a much tougher time breaking into the scene. And it doesn't seem like the trend is going to change anytime soon, with highly anticipated titles on the horizon like Ananta and Silver Palace looking like they won't be wildly deviating from any established patterns. Luckily, there's still a handful of older gachas that are still going strong, showing that there is a market for games that aren't similar to Genshin, like FGO, the original Arknights, and even Dragon Ball Legends. And we've even had some newer games that have succeeded in proving that the open world format isn't the end all be all, with an action-packed beat-em-up-esque game like Zenless Zone Zero paving the way for games that are smaller in size but more focused on the moment-to-moment gameplay, or Honkai Star Rail returning to a format more similar to the old turn-based gachas while blending in bits and pieces from the open world design, incorporating it in a way that fleshes out the setting and characters. It's hard to say where the trends are going to take us and what gachas will look like years from now, but like Polaroids and denim jackets, everything comes full circle. But until then, I guess Silver Palace does look kind of cool. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like it, don't forget to like and subscribe, or dislike if you think I'm being too hard on open world games, and comment let me know why. But this has been Pity Forte, and I'm out.